about your story. How did you get to the point where you're at now, and what experience do you have with interdisciplinary work?
My name is Kathy Erdman Becker, and I coordinated the Interdisciplinary Studies program here since about 2010 and taught in the program as early as 2008. And Tom is now transitioning to into that role, and I'm moving into the role of experiential learning coordinator, which again is going to be very interdisciplinary in nature. So, you know, I think I've always been interdisciplinary, and I just didn't know it. When I look at my academic background, I have 3 degrees in 3 different areas, but they all sort of intertwine around trying to make the community a better place. And so as we looked at redesigning the interdisciplinary studies major a few years ago, we wanted to have a definition that really made sense. And so we went to the Association for Interdisciplinary Studies and looked at the models that they have for best practices. And it was really eye-opening to think about what interdisciplinary studies really is. And so for our program, we took on the position that it's a process of exploring problems that are too complex for one discipline to solve by itself. And the way our process works is it really has to be integrative. So you're taking the insights from the most relevant areas of study or professions, and you're integrating them into a new understanding about that process. And so then in looking at that definition, interdisciplinary is the integration part. But then there's also multidisciplinary work and cross-disciplinary work, which are still valuable, but they're using a different process. So multidisciplines would be, you're an expert, I'm an expert, we're working together to solve the problem. And that can be an effective model. It's just not quite the model that we're using. Cross-disciplinary would be where I'm looking at it from the lens of my profession, and I'm borrowing from these other areas to create the understanding. Again, not an ineffective method, but I just want to be clear that a lot of times interdisciplinary, that term is used, but the process may not be quite the same as what Tom and I are trying to accomplish in our program. So, you know, after bouncing around and trying on some different things and working in the Career Center for a while, I kind of realized I've always been interdisciplinary, I just didn't know it, because borrowing and trying to integrate and create that understanding has always been how I just operate. So kind of that global big picture is an important skill for students in the interdisciplinary program, or anyone using this process that we're using.
Great. My name is David Murhead. I'm the Executive Director of the Brookings Area Chamber of Commerce, and for the past 16 years I've been involved in nonprofit organizations. Prior to the Chamber of Commerce, I was Executive Director for the Visual Arts Center at the Washington Pavilion in Sioux Falls for about 9 years. So my experience really with collaborative work, interdisciplinary work, has always stemmed from the nonprofit lens and working with the community. For the past 2 years, it's been a lot of community development. That's working everything with everyone from contractors to small business to the government to state, city, national government, as well as university and academics. So from my perspective, not really looking at it from a kind of that academic lens, is really that collaborative work. I sit on a panel of professionals. It's mostly CEOs, presidents. We meet once a month, and it's very, there's no notes that are taken during that time, but a lot of ideas and a lot of progress is generated during these meetings. And so we'll sit around the table for about an hour and a half, and we throw out basically anything's to go. But we sit there with the university president, we sit there with the CEO of Daktronics, the CEO of Falcon Plastics, 3M, the school system, the superintendents are there, and we'll talk about ideas that really are going to be what's better for Brookings, what's better for our region. And so with that, from my end, with the Chamber of Commerce, we're here for the business community, and so our eyes and ears are on the streets listening and talking to the business community for a better Brookings, but part of that is how to do collaborative work throughout the community. And it's not just in Brookings, it stems over to Elkin, it stems over to Aurora. It's our area. And so how to make that collaborative, but how to work with all just different disciplines. And it was interesting reading the questions that you all posed. We had a list of questions. I was just looking at it thinking, why am I on this panel? But then thinking back, the last probably 16 years, a lot of the work that I've done has really been interdisciplinary because I'm not in a shell. I'm constantly working with the community and constantly working with different facets of the community.
I'm Vicki Mixon. There's this famous quote in one of my favorite movies. It's called The Mummy. And the opening scene in that movie is about this woman on a high ladder in the stacks. And this is like one of my nightmares, but all of the stacks of books go falling over. And later on in the movie, when she's asked who she is and what she does, she goes, I am a librarian. And that's what I am. And librarians are really, we're kind of on the edge of your interdisciplinary study as an academic study. And we're part of the whole culture of academics on campus because we work with all of the disciplines on this campus. And so even though I'm the government documents librarian, I'm also a subject librarian who specializes in education and human sciences subjects, but I also help engineering students, and I help math students and computer science students, and I help education students, and yesterday I was working with physical education students. And so I work with all of you on all of your studies while you're here, as well as with the community in doing outreach and assisting with expanding knowledge, basically, is what librarians do, is that we provide access to knowledge and we provide expertise in information. And, you know, a lot of times I say I know a little about a lot of things, but not a lot about any one thing. But because I know a little bit about a lot of things, I can help you to fulfill some of those information needs. And one of the opportunities that I really embrace is the opportunity to talk to you as students to say, you know what, I'm here to help you. And that's what I do. And so don't overlook the library as one of your sources of information for your interdisciplinary studies as well as for your main academic studies.
My name is, oh yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. My name is Darren Junker, and basically you can see up there I've got two things that are on the list, basically as pastor of a church over in Elkton, and also as a CASA volunteer. And what got me into both of those is the same driving force. It's very similar to what Kathy was saying. I was interdisciplinary and didn't know that's what I was. It just turned out that way. Just similar to David, ended up working a lot more focused on nonprofit types of orientations because that's where I think a lot of meaningful work is done, but just slightly different than I'm working on the people side, developing the people. And so, you know, people need the education, they need the economic opportunities, we need the information, but then it's individuals, it's people gathering together and sharing that that's going to cause the actual long-lasting changes. And it's those long-lasting changes that apply to both of those factors. Especially for CASA, if you're not familiar with that, that's court-appointed special advocate. It's for kids that are in abuse and neglect cases, and that can change a person's whole life trajectory if that's handled well or not. And that's probably where I've had the best examples of true interdisciplinary rather than just multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary happens fairly often, and I think a good visual analogy is kind of like, even though everything's digital, you know, we still have the examples. It's used on sometimes the memes. Those color bars they had from the old color television test pattern thing, where you got each color bar is separate and distinct, but they're all represented. Whereas now, of course, you just pop into Photoshop or GIMP or something like that and do a nice little gradient, and you got all those colors blending together. And that's what I find interdisciplinary does, because in interdisciplinary, it's a complete dialogue, shaping each other, rather than just being present. And so that's what makes it so that interdisciplinary approaches can make genuine, long-lasting, generational changes to culture and society, and not just tweaking the performance.
Yeah, I'm Tom Augustini. I have been a history professor here, and I'm taking over as coordinator of interdisciplinary studies. And as a result, I'm actually, frankly, still learning the job a little bit. I'm only doing it 2 weeks, but my primary skills that I'm bringing to the task, I think, especially, are helping people with writing. That's a critical part of interdisciplinary studies, is being able to articulate yourself effectively and clearly in a written sense, and that's a skill set that translates into quite a variety of disciplines outside of the humanities, to the sciences. I think to my brother, who's in mechanical engineering, and the importance that he attaches to being able to write in his particular job. I'm also a research fellow at Mount Vernon at the Washington Library in Washington, D.C. And so I'm back on campus here these 2 weeks. This last semester I was in D.C., so I'm getting readjusted to the weather, although apparently I brought the South Dakota weather down there, as they're telling me. But I'm very excited to be back here, and looking forward to working with each of you. The one thing that I might add is to think about, as you're sitting here today and listening to our conversation, think about how it touches upon your own interests. Think about why you might want to be here, besides from the fact that you have to be here. What is it about interdisciplinary studies is particularly interesting to you? How can it help you advance your own prospects, your own career aspirations, and just your own intellectual interests? Because really, this ought not to be just about a job. This ought not to be just about getting a credential. This ought to be about becoming an educated, intelligent, intellectual person, so that you can, that's a skill that you can develop throughout the rest of your life.
Thank you. Do any of the students have questions they want to start with?
What are some of the don'ts that you shouldn't do when you're working on interdisciplinary team?
What are the skills?
Some of the don'ts, like some you shouldn't do.
Well, I think one of the things that I've seen through the years is the natural human tendency to jump to the conclusion before you've really explored the problem. So having that ability to sort of stay open and really listen. I think you heard from several of the panelists that importance of having a common dialogue, a common language, to create that mosaic that you're talking about. You have to stay open that maybe your first position on this may not be the best solution. And that's really hard to do, especially when you're passionate.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, another thing that I've always worked on is if you have a group of people, say you have 5 people, don't put them in a box. If someone comes in from an angle of an expertise, don't say, okay, that's their only expertise. Try not to put them in a box to say, okay, we have 4 professionals and this is their job right off the bat, because for the probably 99 times out of 100, that individual is going to have more to say than just what their expertise is. So constantly keep that open and keep an open mind. And just to add, when you think of a challenge or a challenge that a group has, think about an iceberg. You have a tip of the iceberg. You can easily jump that tip of the iceberg and say, okay, hey, we're going to solve this problem. And think about how deep that iceberg is. And as you're solving, think about all those angles as you go through. Just don't drown as you're going through.
Yeah, the real long term is what you're
Right.
I think you have to really always think about what a team is. And, team is not Kathy doing her work and Vicki doing her work and Tom doing his work. I mean, a team is working together to accomplish a common goal. And having that common vocabulary helps you to get there. But it's also important to listen to the perspectives of everyone on the team. And the other thing is show up, Don't just sit there. You have to show up and you have to contribute. in order to make that team successful. You're there for a purpose, and that's to accomplish a common goal.
Hinging strongly from what Kathy had started with, where she said, don't assume you have the answer. I would actually even go back one step and say, don't assume you have the right question. It's one of the key things. Make sure, because interdisciplinary, sometimes the issues they're bringing up, especially when somebody doesn't quite make sense, they probably have some assumptions they're bringing to the table, and it's worth having the discussion to dig it out and find out, because sometimes that shifts and redefines the problem, and you might be able to solve something bigger.
I don't know if I'm going to always have something different from what the first four people say. But
you're the new guy.
I'm the new guy, particularly for that reason. But in this case, I will say that, you know, don't compartmentalize each other. Don't compartmentalize yourself and your own approaches. So, truly disciplinary studies, you ought to be. I'm a historian, but if I want to work in an interdisciplinary way and use anthropology or some other discipline, some other related field out of the social sciences, I need to make myself conversant and understand the approach from that other discipline. So it's not just dabbling in the discipline, it's actually becoming conversant in the assumptions and the objectives that discipline entails, because each discipline that we have has its own presumptions, its own expectations. So you have to be truly conversant in the other discipline that you're trying to adopt and embrace. So there can be a learning curve there as well that you have to pull out. But again, if you're working as part of the team, that's going to be the case for everyone within your team, and certainly you can get assistance from those people who are working with you and from those other fields.
Can I ask you a question? Darren, can you expand on what you're talking about on how development people can affect interdisciplinary groups like in the future?
Well, to some degree, you see that in the panel that you have here. They're telling you things like, you know, they're bringing more to the table than just what you might assume from a title or a position. Because each person, and what he was telling too about, you know, developing as a person, that's the goal. Those are definitely things you want to be looking at, because no matter where you're at, no matter what you do, you bring you to the table. And that's the same for all of the other people that are at that meeting. You know, each one of us is bringing different backgrounds, different histories, different information, different expertise, and recognizing that, acknowledging that is a big key factor. And as you start to be able to work with people, then that starts to change you yourself as well. You know, and that's basically one of the things people will often do is they'll assume something can't be done. You know, and that's why I love the Henry Ford quote: "If you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right." I would affirm that completely. That tends to be what happens. Example from actually the church side of things there was that you know, when I arrived over there about 13 years ago, the church was in a difficult position. It was in a difficult scenario because of some things that had happened in its past. A lot of people in the community thought it wasn't going to happen. People in general just think, you know, churches are in decline, nothing happens there. Well, we are at this point, we're the church that has the brand new building at the end of the football field. You know, and it's not about building a building, it's about people being re-energized, because I actually didn't want to build a building. But what I did was I focused on building people, and then the people wanted to build a building, so then it happens. And that's what I see happening with these other things. If you're looking at education or economic development or information that needs to be understood properly, the more you've invested in building the person, the more you're going to get out of those resources.
I would kind of piggyback on what you're saying about building the people. Requires you not just to look at the assumptions, but also their ways of knowing and understanding. And you have to give that respect and credence. And I think sometimes what happens as we start working across different areas of expertise, I'm thinking, you know, my dad was an engineer, and he was a design guy, and he hated working with the salespeople, and he really didn't have a lot of respect for them because they were always promising things that, you know, he didn't know if he could deliver. Well, then he would deliver it, you know. But, you know, there's a lot of anxiety about it, and I always thought, man, if they would just work as a team, and speak the same language, which of course they don't, but learn how to do that, I think there would have been even more productivity out of that team. But I think the thing that happens sometimes is, the respect is lost. Like I might hear what you're saying, but I'm not really listening, like you were talking about. And listening requires you to respect that other position and then figure out how we're going to come together. And it might require some shifting on both sides. In fact, probably likely.
Yeah, there's a context always for interdisciplinary work, and that is the problem that you're facing. So, I mean, you choose interdisciplinary studies because you want to address a particular problem that you don't feel that you can adequately address through biological inquiry or inquiry through geology. So you're looking to combine multiple approaches because then you can achieve a more holistic understanding of the problem and hopefully a more holistic solution to the problem that you're facing in whatever it is that you might be engaging with in your career as a student or a professional. So in that sense, it's about you. It's not about the problem. This is how you're going to overcome it and do it in a better way.
And those of you that have worked more in community and industry, I mean, our students have a really high success rate getting hired and getting into graduate and professional school. And I think it's because they have this more global understanding of things. And I've had a lot of students come back and say, but this is how problems are solved in the real world. Would you say that's accurate? We get accused of not being in the real world.
And I think having experiences like just even today, just listening, and listening to how problems are solved or how people work together, and just talking with your friends on a regular basis about what their studies are and how they solve from the simplest things to the most complex things. It's just working with people and developing yourself with that as well. I'll be honest with you, when I used to go into a meeting, I used to be right. I was right. I was the smartest guy there, and I know this answer. It's this answer. We're going to do it, and I would beat up everyone until we did it. And half the time it wouldn't work. Probably most of the time it wouldn't work. You learn to step back. I learned to step back and really look at what was being done at the time. And much like what Tom was talking about, is different personalities are in that room. And one may be an engineer. I don't think like an engineer, but they bring so much to it, and that creative side. And then you have someone who's brings something to the table, and you just listen to that, and you come to a solution. You're not always going to agree with what that outcome is, and you sometimes you agree to disagree. But if it's best for that group, if it's best for that team to move forward, that's developing people within the group, but also moving it forward.
And I think having accurate information in that process, and that's where the library comes in.
That was what I was going to build on. When we work as professionals in library science, we work from the inquiry side, and on transforming individuals in that inquiry process. So you may have heard that information is power, and that's part of your development as part of that team and that collaborative work, is to be able to identify what kinds of information you need, where to find that information, and who can help you to gain it. And if it's your team that can help you to come to conclusions on the information that you bring to the table, that helps to develop each member of that team even further, and to solidify the solutions that you do come to conclude at the end of your inquiry. So, from our perspective as information professionals, we really try to build each individual in their quest for knowledge, for their quest for information, to fulfill the needs that they have for a particular purpose, whether it be to problem solve, to create, and just for general knowledge. But it helps you to develop as an individual as well as to develop the work of your interdisciplinary team.
So what can we do right now as students, not as professionals, to increase our chances of better
get involved. Get involved, whether it's what's below this, student association, because they work with. When I go to the city council, sometimes the student association president or vice president always speaks to the city council and gives a report. It's nerve-wracking. You're sitting in front of the city council and they're in these big tall seats and they're looking down, and then they do a great job. But that's a way to, even if it's just speaking in front of those bigger groups, it kind of breaks down that barrier of how can I access these individuals in the community that sometimes are put up on a pedestal, or whether they are or not, but sometimes that's perception, whether it's through a student thinking of that or not. How to break that down is getting involved. At the Chamber of Commerce, we have a number of different committees that have professionals, but in our bylaws, we have slots for students in every single committee. I think we have 8 different committees, and students can be part of that. They can't be president or chair of that committee because of time restrictions, but they can be part of it, and they can be present, so they can actually be at the table listening to some of these discussions and being active and part of those discussions.
Are you looking for any students right now?
We're always looking. Yeah.
Always looking
yeah,
for
and I
students.
can pass that information along.
Yeah. I think that's true with a lot of committees that have student representatives. Just ask around, because a lot of times that's the hardest position to fill on that committee. Because you guys graduate and move on all the time, you know?
Yeah, and part of that being involved is going to be willing to do the hard work that it takes. And that's part of what you're learning no matter what your field of study is right now. There are going to be times you have a project you don't feel like doing, but it's got to be done. Every time you overcome that challenge and that barrier, you're growing yourself. So that's part of how you prepare for beyond being a student.
I would kind of playing off of what Vicky was talking about getting your information and using the library. I think if you're working as an interdisciplinarian, a good skill to develop is how to ask more questions and make fewer statements. So always be asking people, if they say, it's this way, you know, then I would say, well, okay, so why do you feel that way? Or what's your source for that piece of data? And you don't have to say it in a confrontational way, but I do a lot of work in the disability community with advocacy, that kind of thing, and I have learned, I used to come in and go, and you're breaking the law, or whatever, and that's not an effective approach. It's much more using those interdisciplinary skills to draw out, okay, this is their way of knowing. How do we educate? And kind of taking that take instead of, you know, pushing through to some conclusion that may not even get anybody what they need. And I have a colleague that says, you know, no butt too big, no lips too small, right? Sometimes you have to feed somebody's ego a little bit to get where you need to go. But as long as everybody's on the same page with the solution, that's what you're trying to get to.
Yeah, that's a Socratic method, isn't it? You know, you're asking a series of questions rather than just telling the students the answer, or whoever it is. You're asking a series of questions designed to get the person to think through the problems so that they can come up with their own answers and hopefully achieve a better understanding that way. So that's a very, I think, a very effective technique. It's something I would always do in class, and something that you can certainly do in a variety of contexts, not just professional contexts, personal contexts.
Stemming from that, do you have any particular situations that you could describe where maybe there was an intense conflict or you really disagreed? Maybe people not putting forth effort, like you said, in their group, and how do you handle that in a professional manner other than whatever, I'm just going to move on and do their part for them and we'll just all get the same grade, kind of in that mentality?
One thing I guess that I've always found helpful working in groups is for the group to establish how they want to work together, and then how they're going to keep each other accountable right at the start. So then, you know, there's not as much conflict then when you do have to say, hey, we agreed that we were going to have whatever ready, are we going to have this piece done by this meeting time? And, you know, you don't have to say it in a mean way, just say what's the fact, right? I'm observing that, you know, you didn't have your part done, what's going on, right? And you can follow up with a question, and then they can say whatever, it could be an excuse, could be a legitimate reason, and then how do we redirect and get back on track? And you always want to get back to that question, how do we get back on track?
I think a key is being accountable, and then also, if you're not accountable, just being aware that you're not accountable and apologizing for that, but fix the problem. Always look for that solution. I have a great example. There was Sioux Falls. How many people from Sioux Falls here? There's the Sidewalk Arts Festival. You guys familiar with that? It happens every September. I was in charge of that at the Washington Pavilion. That was my job. My first year there, everything's running great. We have all the vendors, 250 vendors, all this stuff going on. About 2 weeks out, the electrician calls me up and said, "Hey, you haven't ordered a generator yet." And I'm like, "Okay, what do I do?" And I had to order a generator. Basically, a generator powers the entire festival. And it's this huge, giant thing. Didn't know about it, had no idea about it. And I made a huge mistakes, but we fixed the problem. We ended up figuring out a way to get a generator from Omaha or somewhere. Anyway, we got it in there. It worked out well. But my one thing I never forgot to do again was order the generator, but it held me accountable. Instead of me saying, "Oh, guess it didn't happen," I took that next step, and with a team of people, because I didn't know how to order a generator, I didn't know what that meant, but with a team of people that understood, and I was apologetic, I made a mistake, but I need to find a solution, and we got to figure out the solution. So just being accountable, and also if there's a problem, think about what's that solution. If your house is flooding, what do? You shut the main valve off. It's simple things like that, but then if there's other things happen, lean on your team to help with those solutions. At the end of the day, when it's a success, or even if it didn't hit every mark, but it's kind of successful, your team's going to be appreciative that you came to them to ask them for help. You'll find in human nature that's happens quite a bit.
And I think your team supported you too by pointing out.
Yeah. You know, this is a question that they always ask me in interviews. Describe a time when you had conflict with a fellow worker, team member, what have you. And you know what? Conflict is good. Conflict makes you think, and out of chaos can come clarity. And so I don't think that conflict is necessarily bad. But when you look at it from a perspective of solving that problem together and overcoming the conflict and maybe identifying where that conflict begins. Is it a misunderstanding? Do we not have enough, I'm going to go back to information, do we not have enough understanding of your way of knowing and my way of knowing? And that's usually what my experience has been, is that I see things from a different perspective than what my colleague might see it. And to step back and say, hey, you know what? There's value in your perspective. So let's work together to either compromise or choose. You know, sometimes you have to choose, because I know I'm not right all the time. I know if I let that generator not be ordered, there'd be no power. And there'd be a lot of conflict going on the sidewalk, right? So that's just one way to look at conflict, that it's not necessarily always bad. What's bad is if you don't address it.
And I would add to this that number one thing to keep in mind is don't panic. Because you may not be, sometimes the conflict is deep enough and long-lasting enough that it's not going to be solved in one meeting. And so don't panic. You know, just like Val's saying, conflict is not automatically bad. Sometimes it's just simply a sign of progress. It's like the heat from friction, you know. And maybe need that to, well, this morning I needed it to be able to get my window rolled down a little bit when your defroster got too hot. So, you know, you need a little bit of heat once in a while to get things going. And as long as it's directed toward positive goals eventually, and through the process continually trying to redirect, as they've been saying, you know, don't need to panic about any particular instance of conflict. You just simply, as they've already said, you know, you keep looking for the solutions, you keep refocusing, and you move on. You look toward the goal and the objective.
and sometimes you can't achieve a consensus. Sometimes you, at every level, I think that you'll see where you're in a group situation, and there are sometimes people in your group who maybe they want to shoot for the C instead of the A. Maybe they want to, they have just higher aspirations than the other members of the group, and that's when people become leaders. That's what I would say. So that maybe you take on a greater share of the burden in that sense because you have a vision of an objective that maybe other people don't yet see. So you take on that as a challenge for yourself to make things better, hopefully for the group as a whole. And one other thing I'll say about conflict is it can also be, and it can be poisonous, I would say. I mean, you have to be careful that conflict doesn't become destructive of the group as well, because I've also seen that. You have to be very cautious. I mean, conflict is good in the sense that it can stimulate you to find proactive solutions that can be of assistance to the group as a whole. But conflict can also create problems down the road. That's something that one has to be very, I think, cognizant of as you're going through some of this.
Why is it important to learn about interdisciplinary groups?
Well, I think we've kind of addressed, how things actually function. Really you can't work in a bubble. I mean, for me, the scariest thing is serving on a committee where everybody agrees. Because I feel like, are we really examining the problem and the issue, or are we just passing along, bills or funding or whatever it is? So I think it's important to have that questioning mind and looking at the big picture to really come up with a solution, no matter what it is. It could be in your family unit, it could be in your community, it could be in your work setting, because you can use these skills across all of your life, not just in school or in work.
I think it's, what was the question was?
Why is it important?
Why is it important? The importance, I think, is just personal development and as well as professional development while you're within the groups. Opposites tend to attract, and so there's always opposition, and which just mentioned about you don't want to be in a room where everyone agrees, because then you're like, you feel good for a second, then you're like, wait a minute, is that the
what
right?
Are we missing?
We're missing some angle, and so it's that development. You probably do now. You probably, if you've lived in dorms, you probably lived with someone that you're like, oh my gosh, why do they brush their teeth like that? It's the weirdest thing ever. Whatever that is. So people are coming at different angles, and as you get into work, whether it's working at Hy-Vee or working at Starbucks or working at Daktronics, if you're have an internship there, you're working with dynamics of people that come together from all different locations. I lived in DC for a couple of years, and there's a melting pot. You want to talk about a melting pot. No one knows how to drive except you, because you know how to drive. You came from rural America. I could drive great. There's people from all over the nations, but everyone comes with a different, you appreciate their values as well as yours, and it makes you grow as an individual. So I guess just personal growth, professional growth, working within those circles.
I like to tell this story every year around October or so, because that's when elections happen. And I'm a registered Democrat. I'm a very minority. I'm a very much in the minority in my part of Brookings County. I can tell you this. I live by Sinai. My husband is a Republican. And so we have, that's truly interdisciplinary in terms of opposites attract sometimes. But we have a lot of fun during election season, each answering the phone for the other, determining which party is calling us for our support. Well, you can have a lot of fun under those circumstances, but we actually have a lot of discussions about, what's best, what's better, how can we work, instead of canceling out each other's votes, how can we work together to make a better country, a better county, a better city? How can we work together? And I think that's where interdisciplinary really comes in. Again, we talk about perspectives, to recognize that there are other perspectives besides our own. And sometimes, you know, somebody has a driving agenda, and that, which is opposite of everybody agreeing, and maybe not everybody has that agenda. And so you have to work together to come to the common good.
So I'm on a panel that we all agree about.
Disagree.
Yeah, because we're kind of all saying the same thing. I don't really have anything unique to add to this one. It really is just interdisciplinary is important because that's how it actually works.
Yeah, I don't have anything.
We're gonna start on that end.
Yeah.
I will say that you're asking excellent questions so far.
Oh, good, he gets the next one.
Yes. There's one over here too.
Alright, you guys kind of talked about creating a dialogue within your group. Do you guys kind of expand on that, like how it's the best way to get people from small towns, from big cities, kind of communicating and figuring out each other's perspectives and then making issues kind of communicate that way?
Get to know each other, talk to each other, get to, you know, go out to lunch, and just talk to them as people, find out what their perspectives are, and if you want to lead, show them that you care about them, that you're not just in it for yourself. And the way to do that, I think, is you have to be consistent, and you have to be even-handed in how you treat people, not necessarily in a supervisory role, but just in general. That's a starting point.
And then, especially if you've gotten an opportunity to be able to learn something about them ahead of time, that's great. But even if you haven't, even if you're walking into a meeting cold or something like that, or maybe when you're working on a class project, working as a group, and somebody you haven't worked with in a group before, one of the things to watch for is the one who's staying silent, and then ask them a question on purpose. You know, if you've got a chance to know them ahead of time, or if you happen to know something about them, obviously you can make the question as relevant as possible, something they're likely to activate with and become energized about. But if not, start with asking at least a question of somebody who's not contributing yet.
Absolutely, and I'll just build on that. I have a colleague who is incredibly intelligent and capable, and has, I mean, her insight is so, it's just wonderful. I can't describe it enough. She is silent. She is so quiet. She is incredibly shy, and asking the question, "What do you think? What do you think? What, you know?" I look at it from this perspective, but I know that you know more about this subject than I know. Can you please enlighten me? And again, just get to know the people that you're working with, because everyone has something to contribute, and they might not feel comfortable doing it sometimes. That's the other advice, is try to make people feel comfortable. I mean, respect. That's probably the key, is to respect the people that you work with.
One thing I'll add is if you're going to a meeting, whether it's a meeting with your friends or a meeting with a professional setting, probably professional more than your friends, but come with a purpose. Come with an agenda of some sort. An agenda is a weird word, but come with a list of, these are the things we want to tackle today, these are the things we want to discuss. That way you can keep it a little more concise, and you're not wasting time of those that are around you, because the last thing you ever want to do is bump someone out that says, well, I didn't really contribute because there wasn't much time, because 4 people spoke, and well, I didn't really get a chance to say something too. But you come with a purposeful message or purposeful agenda of some sort. And I've shown up to meetings where I had an agenda, someone else had an agenda, just figure out how to bring those together if there was a lack of communication prior to it. And then also, if there's an icebreaker of some sort, if you don't know each other, have an icebreaker. Just throw something out there, your favorite dog's name or whatever. Or
Cookies
dog's
work.
name.
Yeah.
Or cookies, yeah. Cake.
I don't know if I have much to add to what the others said. Just kind of, I think, on Vicky's side, for some people, it's really hard when you have the divergent view in the group to bring it out. And I would say, you need to say it, because it may be that other people are thinking it too, and they don't want to bring it forward because they're afraid of that conflict that we were talking about earlier. And obviously, there's a way you present that can be threatening, or it can be more just, let's throw this on the table for discussion. And until you start doing it, you're not going to get good at it. And so the first few times you do it, you might kind of blow it, but we learn from life. And so don't be afraid to apologize if it didn't come out the right way, but it needs to get on the table. That's the whole point of having the group together.
Can I add one thing? You've mentioned a couple times now already about the non-threatening questions and stuff, and I keep remembering I should make sure to pass that on to you guys. A simple little lesson from some counseling training is that questions that start with how are less threatening than questions that start with why. Mm-hmm. So that's one tidbit right there already. So.
Or you.
Yep, exactly. Start with I rather than you. Start with how rather than why.
Anyone have any final burning question? Now's the time. Okay, I think we're great. Let's give our panel a hand. Thank you.